Hello, my name is Trey Goodhue and I am the Assistant Curator of Education here at the Tri-Cities Historical Museum in Grand Haven, Michigan. I would like to welcome you to our new summer lecture series entitled We Were Here Too, Exploring West Michigan's Queer Past. This series hopes to highlight the work of historians and activists across West Michigan who are putting in the work to research and share the stories of West Michigan's queer individuals and places. This series is comprised of 3 segments covering the areas of Saugatuck-Douglas, Grand Rapids, and Holland, and could not have been done without the assistance of our fantastic panel of lecturers made up of Eric Gollannek, Kutzel, and John Kerr of the Saugatuck-Douglas History Center, Aaminah Shakur of the Grand Rapids Pride Center, and Jeffrey Sorensen of Out on the Lakeshore. All segments of this series have been pre-recorded and will be available for viewing on their scheduled release date, which you can find in the description box below or on the Tri-Cities Historical Museum's Facebook page. Our first segment is coming to you from Douglas, Michigan, at the Saugatuck-Douglas History Center with hosts Eric Gollannek, Ken Kutzel, and John Kerr, who will be bringing us the story of how these small lakeside communities grew to be a destination for queer folks across the Midwest, as well as information on their new exhibit, A Century of Progress, a Saugatuck-Douglas LGBTQ timeline, set to open in September of 2021. Without further ado, I'll let them take it away.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm Eric Gollannek, Director at the Saugatuck-Douglas History Center, and I'm here today with Ken Kutzel and John Kerr. Thank you to Trey Goodhue for organizing this series for Pride Month and for reaching out to us in Saugatuck-Douglas to share our community story. Saugatuck and Douglas are 2 of Michigan's most popular Lake Michigan summer tourist destinations and residential centers for people interested in history and the arts. From its origins as a lumbering and shipbuilding community in the 1800s, the area has built a reputation as a home for all, with a significant LGBTQ population. In the late 19th and 20th centuries, lumbering gave way to steamship, shipbuilding, and railroad travel. And the Saugatuck area along the Lake Michigan shoreline became a resort and arts destination, with people coming from Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit, and across the region. Automobile tourism brought even more people in the middle of the 20th century and definitely shaped the community and its character as we know it today. I'll share more about what we have gathered about how Saugatuck became Saugatuck in a few minutes, but first I want to share a little bit about who we are and thank our supporters that make our work possible. The mission of the Saugatuck-Douglas History Center is to preserve local history and inspire learning to inform and improve our community. We are a volunteer-driven organization of 700 members that saves and shares the stories of Saugatuck-Douglas. We have an established tradition of doing oral history and preserving photographs, objects, and ephemera, as well as art made by local and visiting artists. Founded as the Saugatuck-Douglas Historical Society 35 years ago in 1986, we restored the municipal pump house water building on the banks of the Kalamazoo River and at the foot of Mount Baldhead in 1992. It's a museum exhibit space today. The Old Schoolhouse Douglas campus features the Old Schoolhouse or Douglas Union School, where we're coming to you from today, from 1866-67. It was acquired by the Historical Society History Center and restored from 2008 until 2012. This is the home of our collections, as well as exhibits for our art collections of local and regional artists. We're a volunteer-driven organization that has researched and published over 12 books and more than 30 exhibits over the years. 35 years of volunteer effort shaped the work that we do. We owe a huge debt to Dr. Jim Schmeeken, Professor Emeritus in History from Central Michigan University, who led the research for nearly all of these books and publications. The late Bill Galligan of Saugatuck was also an early supporter of the Gay History Project at the History Center. Larry Gammons and Carl Jennings donated extensive archives from the Douglas Dunes Resort, as well as providing personal memories and historical insights that make what we're going to share with you today possible. Finally, at the History Center, a team of volunteers has worked to care for LGBTQ collections and the stories of people that made Saugatuck what it is. A short list of these folks on the team include Sally Winters, Vic Bella, John Kerr, Ken Kutzel, and Jonathan Shakur. Interns working on this project included Jen Rusty and Eric Livingston. Finally, to thank some of our supporters, we are proudly supported by the Michigan Council for the Arts and Cultural Affairs and National Endowment for the Arts. Funding for the History Center's Century of Progress LGBTQ timeline has been provided by Michigan Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities. We also receive support from the Allegan County Community Foundation and from West Shore Wear. West Shore Wear is a philanthropic organization of gay men and women and their allies living in Saugatuck-Douglas in the greater West Lakeshore community. The organization is dedicated to increasing the positive influence and public awareness of the contribution that gay men and women make to the communities in which they belong. And finally, our members. Our 700 members are a part of everything that we do. We appreciate their support and encourage you to become a member if you've not done so already. So shifting our focus to the key question, the key topic at hand, this is really where we all began thinking about West Michigan's queer past in Saugatuck-Douglas. Why did Saugatuck become a haven for gay men and women? What was it like to identify as queer in the early and mid-20th century? What is the story of equality and human rights for the local LGBTQ community? What social and economic progress has the local gay and lesbian community made over the last 100 years? And who are the prominent and not so prominent gay and lesbian individuals who have made an impact on our local community? The History Center first dove into these questions and these topics in 2006 with the founding of the Gay History Project, as it was described at the time. Collecting stories, memorabilia, photographs, all led 3 years later to the inclusion of the first exhibit materials as part of the summertime exhibit at the History Museum at Mount Baldhead. And we see a detail of one of those panels here, Summertime Gay Times. Since 2009, this project has continued, and we've delved deeper into this story. Extending back from the recent past, we asked the question, when does this story begin? How do we find history that's hidden of people in the margins, and ask questions where there aren't clear-cut sources and things aren't so straightforward? One of the earliest historical records that points to some interest into queer life at the Lakeshore is from the Lakeshore Commercial newspaper, the present-day Commercial Record from 1897. And in this article, there's a discussion of a bathing house at last to be built on the lake beach. And this is near the mouth of or turn in the river, of the Kalamazoo River. And it says here, quoting from the article, "The beach house, such an institution, has come to be a necessity, and vigorous steps should at once be taken by the village board to put a stop to men and boys bathing in a nude condition on the beach adjacent to the park lands." The area's beaches have long been an attraction to people coming to the area and seeking a place for people to be themselves, have fun, and meet others with a degree of acceptance and anonymity. And well, there's some ambiguity about the details of the bathing house story from 1897. It does connect with a longer trend of nude bathing north of the Oval Beach, a section of the beach in private ownership. And we see a photograph of that here. This operated from through the 1960s into the 1990s. Is that?
Oh, right. And they weren't nude on the beach.
Right.
They were nude up in the dunes, so it was a nude area. It was for hiking and sunbathing and that. But you were not to be seen. That was one of the unwritten rules. You were not to be seen from the beach.
Gotcha. Yeah. This was I don't know if you can add anything to this photograph of fun and a place to be oneself and meet others. This is the football game.
Because so many gay men were attracted to the area, this was an annual event. I think in the fall, where they came for an annual football game. They each had their own team T-shirts with each team was named after a popular movie star at the time. But every year, it was a big deal for them.
Yeah, and they also used the beach. I know one story I heard. There was a group that would take Oriental carpets out there and China and everything. They would literally set a big banquet out on the beach. They did that a couple times a year.
Lots of uses of the beach and engagement with the lakefront landscape. We see this carry over in the aesthetics of advertising and promotion. Once the Douglas Dunes Resort opened in 1981, this is original artwork that was produced that sort of embraces this imagined landscape and the male body is sort of as one, is sort of linked together, and the sense of place is very strong as we look at these images and think about their significance. These are all things kind of pieced together as the Century Progress team has worked and sought to kind of make these connections and also seek to bring together the things that are well known, like the founding of the Douglas Dunes Resort by Carl Jennings and Larry Gammons in 1981, along with other businesses further back in time, and other things that have just learned about and are yet to learn about, other details that have continued to refine our understanding of the history of the area. The Blue Tempo Bar and House of Music opened in February 1960 and operated until 1975. And this is often described as the first gay straight, gay tolerant bar establishment, night spot in the area. And we'll see in a moment that there's some other details that we've learned that sort of add to this story. But the Blue Tempo is one right along with the private beach that is often talked about as central in the history or our understanding of gay history in Saugatuck and Douglas. Bob Dameron's address book, the sort of green book of gay travelers from the 1960s and onward, lists the Blue Tempo Bar here in 1974 under Saugatuck entry, where it describes Saugatuck as Michigan's answer to Fire Island, a popular summer and weekend resort near Holland.
And we should add Carl Jennings, who went on to open the Dunes Resort, was a bartender at the Blue Tempo.
Yes.
Which was a big deal. And also, the building mysteriously burned down. And no one knows exactly why, but there are a lot of suspicions about the reasons.
Much like other gay clubs, this was one that seemed to operate with some layers of mystery around it, especially as it pertained to the law and the intentions of the owners, managers of the establishment as well. Toad Davis, who opened the Blue Tempo, was self-described, his emphasis is on jazz. He was a jazz lover during really a peak of the jazz craze in the late 1950s and 1960s, and various paraphrases of things that he said that, he wasn't particularly supportive of gay clientele,
Right.
And they didn't like jazz.
That's right.
He did.
And like a lot of businesses in the area, Toad Davis didn't want this place to become a gay bar, but he realized in the off season he needed income. So gay people were welcome for the money they spent, which We've seen.
Well, and he would bilk the gays with a real high cover charge.
Yes.
And there was a story where at one point the gays got so fed up that they literally staged like a protest across the street, and they refused to go in till he got rid of it. So that was quite early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In relationship to the law, there were also some distinctive challenges in the 1960s and 70s. From 1948 onward, Michigan state law prohibited bars and clubs from serving or admitting, quote, prostitutes, homosexuals, or vagrants. And so you could lose your liquor license and be shut down for operating an establishment that served homosexual clientele. And yet, to our knowledge, the Blue Tempo was never shut down, was never raided or shut down.
Just burned down.
In the 50 years that it was in operation. So we had a lot of information from the 2000s and into the 2010s. And we had the good opportunity to collaborate with Grand Valley State University to do further research, to do further outreach to the community. The Cucci Office of Local History, working with the Saugatuck-Douglas History Center, received funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities to do a history harvest program where we opened our doors to the public, we trained volunteers to do oral history interviews, and scan digitized materials that then went on display and also went into digital collections at Grand Valley's special collections, which are accessible today. The exhibit opened in June of 2018 and featured a number of artworks and artifacts from our collection, as well as interpretive panels, thematic panels, and photographs of the portrait of the subjects that were interviewed. In total, volunteers interviewed 34 individuals from the community. The focus, as the name implies, Stories of Summer, was on summertime in Saugatuck-Douglas, so not just year-round residents, but vacationers and people who spent time here during that time. And these 40 hours of oral history interviews, along with 2,000 historic photos and ephemera that was scanned and digitized, really added to our picture of life here at mid-century and made it much more accessible, both to us and our members, but to the public at large. And so if you go on to Grand Valley's digital collections page, you'll see Summers in Saugatuck collection, and you can then search through these and see scans of things like Gay Chicago magazine with advertisements featuring the Douglas Dunes or other events going on in the area. The Stories of Summer was a good example of the importance of preserving records of the past in the stories and lived experiences of people. And Ken Kutzel and I were able to interview Carl Jennings and Larry Gammons in over an hour long, maybe 2 hour long interview, speaking about Carl's time here tending bar at the Blue Tempo and the challenges that they faced in opening the Douglas Dunes. Carl passed away in the winter of 2019, which just highlighted the importance of recording these lived experiences of people in our community. It also shined a spotlight on the need to really acknowledge our important individuals that made the community what it was, and to recognize and honor them as well. This all sort of came together with an interest in pride. Douglas held its first community pride ever in the summer of 2019. And there was great efforts to also commemorate, to tie this in with the commemoration of the Stonewall Rebellion in 2019 and the first Pride event, Christopher Street Liberation Day of 1970. The History Center launched a program to put together its first LGBTQ history exhibit at that time, slated to open in June of 2020. And as we all know, plans changed as we were shut down through the spring and through the summer of 2020. So Pride Month in Douglas and Saugatuck was a quieter affair than we had originally envisioned and hoped for. The timeline, the exhibit format that we settled on was really a timeline format. It's something that could be expanded and adapted as needed as we learned more information. It would also help put the local events that we were learning so much about into a state and a regional, into national context as well. Do you want to say anything about the exhibit and how it came together, or the format of the exhibit, on behalf of the team, John?
But the concept of the timeline was an opportunity for us to show the progress that gay men and women have made in the last 100 years or so, both at the local level here in Saugatuck-Douglas, in the state of Michigan, and also nationally. So we try and connect those three levels with the issues that we've experienced here, politically, culturally, socially, at all levels. It wraps around the room, literally. All the walls, walls of the room follow the timeline, really going from the late 1800s up to today. And in the last year, we've had to make some modifications because things change so rapidly.
Yeah, it's really a strong example of both the opportunities to do something really relevant and immediate, and the challenges of doing contemporary history. That you're talking about things that happened, literally yesterday in some cases. And how do you tell something that will stand on its own? But also respond to these changing conditions and changing attitudes as well. I'm going to highlight just a couple of the slides and give us all a sense of what some of the content looks like, some of the themes look like. You can see the different levels of the timeline and colors help identify these different state, local, regional, national trends. And these contributing factors are things that we've highlighted that are our analysis, our preliminary conclusions about how Saugatuck happened, how Saugatuck became Saugatuck. So factors like steamship travel and geography and closeness to Chicago and other metropolitan areas help shape the culture of resort life and a certain anonymity as well of travel that was important. The importance of the arts and of Oxbow and Bohemian artists, as we've described them here, and the forward movement camp and progressive thought generally that was a part of this, coming out of the settlement house movements in Chicago that were literally established at the lakeshore just outside of Saugatuck and Douglas.
One point I'll make that sometimes is lost. Along with all these other things going on in Saugatuck at the time, you had the fishing, and it was a shipbuilding center. And for that reason, you had a lot of sailors here. And sailors have a reputation for sort of doing things a little on the wild side. And Saugatuck provided that. I mean, there were things here. I know there was a bar on the Saugatuck side, the west side of the river. And I know that it had rooms on the side for prostitutes. And I mean, there were all kinds of things that went on there that were not necessarily gay related, but it was just, there just was more tolerated here. I think because it was, I don't like the word diverse because it has a different meaning now, but I mean, there were just so many kinds of people here that would come in and out. So they, and of course, it was economic. I mean, it kept things going.
Yeah, place definitely matters in this story, and that's one of the things we tried to really bring out. What are some of the distinctive and unusual factors that influenced the community's history over time? We also tried to call attention to both things that are well known that people would want to know more about, and also maybe some new discoveries, things that people aren't as familiar with. And so we talked about the Blue Tempo bar that everyone's heard about, the Douglas Dunes, but in fact, my understanding is that this was a much earlier bar that was known for being a gay hangout well before 1960 and before the Blue Tempo had opened up. So that history long predates that period. And other hotels and lodging houses that catered to gay clientele or catered to, were accepting of gay as well as straight guests. And so Lucille's Lodge for Lonesome Ladies was one of these lodging houses in Saugatuck
Yeah, and relative to that, the previous slide talked about the closeted histories. One of the problems that we've had is really the early part of the 20th century, people didn't really identify publicly as being gay, even though their lifestyles indicated exactly that. We have examples of men and women who lived together for many years with partners of the same sex, but they were never publicly considered gay or homosexual. They were just accepted in the community. And we struggle with how to present those people in our exhibit because people didn't run around with rainbow flags at the time. And we try to be fair and credible with the information we present. An example I think we can use is Bert Tillstrom, the well-known puppeteer of Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, who was a Saugatuck resident, but he was accepted by everyone in town. But at the same time, he's better known as being a world-class puppeteer and television personality.
Well, and he himself did not ever want to talk about it, and in fact, even friends of his who are still alive protect that. Because, think about it. Here you have the most famous children's star. And, if the public thought he was gay, he'd have no career anymore at the time. So they still protect him.
And we respect that.
Yeah.
That's how we want him to be known, and the community wants to remember him that way. But at the same time, we view him as part of the local gay history.
The stories we move through the 1960s, some topics we've talked about in this presentation already, but the documentary record becomes more substantial as we move into the 1960s and 70s as people are coming out and there's more semi-public or popular information that becomes available, like the Dameron Guide or newspaper accounts, and we're able to use those. We also have the advantage of living memory of people being alive that we can talk to and interview, and many of those folks willing to go on the record and have their interviews recorded and documented. The 1970s and 1980s continue this. We can fill in some more of the marginal spaces or blank spaces with literal color photographs, or descriptions that we're getting firsthand, and the story of the Douglas Dunes into play by 1981, which was, I don't know if you can add a little bit of the significance of the Douglas Dunes resort to Saugatuck-Douglas area.
I think that the Dunes Resort, first of all, there was nowhere to go. I mean, for gay people and let's just say alternative lifestyles, because there were bisexuals and everything at the time, just like now. But oddly enough, when that opened up, it was the best restaurant in the area, and a lot of people from Holland would come down to eat there. That was the Sir Douglas was the name of the restaurant. But what Carl and Larry actually did was they bought an older motel called the Aaminah and turned it into the Douglas Dunes. And the way they created economic progression actually in Douglas was they started advertising in Chicago and in Detroit. And they wanted to make sure that the guys or the women, whoever, it was more guys there really at first, but that they felt safe there. So they literally had buses that would go to Detroit and pick the people up, or they would go to Chicago and pick the people up and then bring them here, so that the whole thing was like a fully paid thing, but they were safe. because in other places they could go, they could be beaten up, and that's really what started it here. And I think this is a personal thing, but my own belief is that this whole idea of Saugatuck, in quotes, being, sort of a gay town, it's based on one business. I mean, yes, there were other places that were gay tolerant, and I'm not even necessarily going to say gay friendly. They were gay tolerant. It was economic, because they needed to show that that these guys had money, and in fact, I don't know if it was before or after the Dunes was firebombed. So after Carl and Larry opened that business up, it was firebombed. There were people that didn't want it there. But what happened was there were some rumblings, not so much in Douglas as I understand, but in Saugatuck, that they didn't want that kind of business here and they didn't want those people here. And so Carl and Larry, being the very clever men that they were, started a thing with the gay dollars. And they started marking the money. And they were able to trace how much money was coming in from gay people. And that really changed people's minds. Didn't change their minds that they wanted them there anymore, but money talks. And that's why sometimes people will say, yes, it's still in a conservative area, but economically, I mean, it has helped. And of course, with that, brought a lot of interesting culture that matched the art. Because with Oxbow and all that, really, there were things that went on in town, but that was out there across the river. They would come in once in a while, but they didn't really affect so much what went on in town. But you had very interesting people coming here. Slowly, some of these gay people they started buying property here. And so then you had gay-owned businesses. And slowly it changed. At one point, a lot of that moved from Saugatuck to Douglas, because Douglas was a little bit more friendly.
I want to quickly point out, even though the Dunes is a huge magnet across the Midwest to draw gay people, it's in Douglas, the town of Douglas, which is across the river from Saugatuck. It's in Douglas because Saugatuck, the people in Saugatuck, wouldn't sell the property to Carl and Larry to build the Dunes where they initially wanted it. And Larry will tell the story, as they were leaving Saugatuck after being rejected, they had to turn right to get on the Blue Star Highway. And on their way out of town, they passed by the motel that Ken mentioned with the for sale sign in front of it. And that's why it's in Douglas, because they wouldn't accept or tolerate those people in Saugatuck.
Douglas also was faster to pass protections for gay people. Saugatuck was more resistant. But so a lot, interestingly enough here, city council members, I mean, there are so many people of different orientations that you don't even think about it. I mean, somebody you see sometimes in the news now, oh, there's a gay person's running for an office. And it's like people are shocked. And I mean, here, it's kind of weird if there's a straight person running for office, because the gays have, there's so many have retired here. And they've been very positive citizens.
Right. And that's a good transition into the 2000s and 2010s. Which really documents some of the institutional power of LGBTQ individuals in Saugatuck and Douglas, as well as some of the challenges and some of the pushback and resistance that manifests itself as well. In 2003, the Dunes Resort launched a gay travel guide for businesses, people coming to the area, in part because the Convention Visitors Bureau was not willing to acknowledge that back in the early 2000s. Very different story today, but within the last 20 years, remarkable changes in attitude. The growth and prominence of the Douglas UCC Church as a center of inclusion and diversity, and particularly of LGBTQ congregants. And in the 2010s, some of this economic and political power transcends from the local to the state and even national context as well. I know, John, you
Sure.
can speak to some of this.
Yeah, in the bottom left are two Saugatuck residents, Marcia and Glenna. They were the first same-sex couple married in the state of Michigan. They were married very early on a Saturday morning, and by 11 a.m. the governor stopped the marriages of same-sex couples. Eventually, their marriage was part of a class action lawsuit. They went to the United States Supreme Court, where we won. And Glenn and Marshall were on the steps of the Supreme Court when the decision was made. So they're viewed locally as kind of leaders in same-sex marriage. But we're also, in our exhibit, we're talking about the Elliott Larson Act in the state of Michigan, which is all about equality and equal rights for all. It was passed in 1976. It included just about everything except sexual preference and orientation and sexual identity, which to this day it still hasn't passed. I think last year nationally they approved for job protection, but in the state of Michigan, for gay and lesbian people, it is still legal to kick them out of their apartment or not allow them to stay in your hotel. So those are the kind of political things we like to highlight in the exhibit we're doing.
So as we're wrapping up our program for today, first I'd like to thank everyone for joining us and invite you all to come to Douglas, as well as to Saugatuck, but to come later this summer and see the opening of Century Progress over Labor Day weekend and see for yourself, learn some of this history for yourself. Second of all, I'd like to call all of us to sort of do the work of documenting the lives of people who have lived their lives in the margins. It's important to document and preserve all history. And I think from a historian's perspective, it's important to show that LGBTQ people are here now, but they have always been here, whether they've been documented or been chosen to be seen or shown their lives. So with that, thank you very much.